welcome back. Today I wanted to discuss some issues I've noticed with DJI Neo, and I'm talking about some very serious issues that I found online and I also ended up experiencing myself. So the issue I want to talk about is that of DJI Neo very randomly flying away at a high speed in random directions. Now, when I first got the drone in early September, before I actually ended up receiving it, I went online to see what other users have been saying about the drone. And I noticed that quite a few of the comments mentioned things that, DJI Neo was going out of control. People were having trouble controlling the drone. And I assumed that, well, it's a cheap drone. For many people, it's their first drone. So maybe they're not experienced, they're running into user errors, or potentially just people being people, right? Eventually, however, when I got the drone, I realized that there was a lot of commonality between the issues that people were mentioning. I also ended up experiencing something very similar when I took the drone up in the air. And this ultimately ended up causing me to lose a bit of confidence, at least with the current firmware for DJI Neo. So what exactly happened? Well, if you look at a lot of these comments online on both DJI community forum, Reddit, etc., you'll see that the issue appears something like this. Usually people have no issues launching the drone goes up. However, at some point, due to a number of potential reasons, the drone goes out of control and it ends up flying in a very specific direction. In my case, it ended up flying, right to left. And this often seems to be the case with many users who will notice that the drone will suddenly and at high speed start to shift and move in a direction. As you can imagine, this is very dangerous compared to the issues I mentioned previously of the drone being a bit too loud or the camera needing improvement. The fact that you can so quickly and so suddenly lose control of the drone is a problem because, well, first of all, you risk damaging the drone. Luckily, the drone is well built, even after hitting my neighbor's fence when I lost control. However, you could potentially lose it if it goes into water, over a cliff, or you could even potentially risk damage to property or personal injury. So this is a major issue, and I personally never ended up experiencing it with any other drones. And it seems that other DJI users as well, many of whom are experienced flyers and users of drones, have also not experienced something similar in the past with their other drones. The other thing I should mention is that when I flew the drone, I did experience a bit of wind. However, even though it's possible that the wind at maybe 10 meters of height, it could have shifted the drone, affecting its positioning and its lock on me, I was still hoping that as I lowered the drone, that it was gonna stabilize once it goes to a point where there is much less wind. Unfortunately, it seemed that once that initial loss of stability, positioning, lock-on, whatever you want to call it, it seems that once that occurred, the drone was never fully able to recover. So this is certainly, again, something that DJI needs to look at, because the way I see it, such drastic responses from the drone, even to minor loss of a GPS signal, even due to a minor loss of the subject, to me, the way it responds is just too drastic, too dramatic, and it does not give the operator any real time to do any type of corrective action. So then, what could be causing some of these issues? It's difficult to speculate unless we are DJI engineers, software and or hardware. However, there seems to be a bit of a pattern in terms of what people are reporting. So one of the first issues that seems to happen, and this sort of happened in my case as well, is that the drone, DJI Neo, will at some point lose linkage. It will lose sight of one or many of the satellites that it connects to. Now, you would imagine that when a drone, whether it's DJI drone or really any other, you would imagine that if there's this loss of signal, loss of connection to satellites, you would imagine that the drone would simply stay afloat in the air until it can regain signal and then hopefully resume what it was doing, or potentially wait for the user, the operator, to get close enough to the drone to reestablish a link, and then the user can land the drone or navigate it somewhere else. The second potential issue seems to be a variation of users. They fly the drone, the Neo. They have a physical controller, so they're not using the quick modes, they're not using their smartphone. they end up flying in, for example, a normal mode. They switch to sports mode, and then suddenly the drone goes out of control. So again, it seems that something happens, hopefully in firmware, where once the drone loses the connection to maybe the controller, that this ends up resulting in the software again going out of control with the drone flying off in a random direction. Again, it's a big issue. So the third variation of this issue with DJI Neo seems to be something like the drone loses sight of the operator. So initially it's okay, it locks on the user, on the subject. However, at some point, once it loses the connection, or more specifically, once it loses sight of the operator, again, this is something that seems to potentially cause the drone to start to behave erratically and out of control. Now, some people have mentioned, well, you shouldn't fly DJI Neo in dark environments, and I think this is very much true. Even the drone itself, once you launch it, if you try flying, it will give you an audible signal that you're trying to fly in a dark environment.
Fly in well-lit, textured environments.
So it will give you a warning, usually that it can't see the subject or that you need to fly in a well-lit, textured environment. But nonetheless, based on some of the videos I've seen from various other YouTube users or just people posting their videos to YouTube, it seems that this issue can occur even in relatively well-lit environments. In my case, I was flying outside during daytime, so even though the drone could have potentially lost sight of me for a few seconds, I still think that instead of trying to randomly and very quickly fly side to side, I think a better firmware situation or a better software, I would say logic, would have been to pause what it's doing, try to reestablish a connection, and if it can't find the connection again to either the satellites or to the subject matter in the camera, to just hover in place and wait for potential additional input from the user, or in the worst case scenario, it should just land, which I think all of these scenarios I think would be preferable, again, to having the drone start to randomly and quickly fly in different directions where it can cause damage either to itself, to properly, or it could potentially end up injuring somebody. Another potential issue that people have mentioned is the fact that you should, according to DJI's manual for the drone, you should not be flying DJI over water. So there are two issues with this. First of all, when you look at DJI Neo promotional material, you will see that there are many different scenes in which the drone is flown over water, whether it's for quick shots, where it's launched from hand, or you see in a different shot, the person is controlling the drone with FPV glasses or goggles, and they're following the boat. Now, look, I realize that when it comes to drones, you don't want to fly them too close to the surface of water. There are more air currents. You can potentially get hit by a wave. There are issues with reflectivity of the downward sensor. If you're flying over salt water, there's potential for sea salt spray to hit the drone. So I don't recommend flying very close to the surface of the water. However, the issue is still that the vast majority of DJI drones in the last, 10 years, they are actually able to fly with no issues over water. I've done it with my Mini 3 Pro. So when I hear that DJI Neo can never be flown over water, that's problematic for two reasons. Number one, as I said, most other DJI drones can fly over water, especially if it's at a reasonable height. And then the second thing is that if DJI is promoting in their official first-party marketing material that the drone can do these things, then it becomes one of two things. Either somebody made a mistake, right? And it's now a bit of a false advertisement where the drone cannot do what it's advertised to do, which is obviously dishonest. Or hopefully this is just a matter, again, of firmware that needs to be adjusted. And once it's done, then DJI Neo should be, or at least should have relatively basic ability to fly over water. So the big question then is, well, what can we do about this? Is there a potential fix? And as I mentioned initially, in terms of what the problem is, so too the solution is highly dependent on having access to DJI software and hardware engineering specifications. Many other DJI drones and drones in general, they have what is known as an ADI or attitude mode. This is basically the mode that turns off all of these sensors in the drone So the drone becomes very dumb in a sense that there are no obstacle avoidance sensors turned on. By the way, there are none on DJI Neo, but just in general. And then this ends up turning off the GPS and a lot of the other tools that are designed to make flying the drone easier. However, what this also means is that the drone should, at least, in principle, be easier to operate, and it would give the user an opportunity to land the drone. Hopefully this information will allow you to be more aware of what can happen at the moment when you fly your DJI Neo, especially when you fly it high and further away from you. So please be careful. Make sure that you always have, quite a bit of clearance around Neo, because if it does go out of control, at least this will give you enough time and space to land the drone safely before it causes damage. Moreover, I hope the DJI is continually and hopefully already at the moment working on some firmware updates for DJI Neo. I think overall it's a great drone, especially for $200. However, as many people have already been mentioning on DJI Community Forum, these random and serious flyaways, this is certainly something that needs to be fixed as quickly as possible. And then hopefully once this is stabilized, DJI can go back and start looking at some of these other issues, such as adding more adjustment to camera control. Thank you for watching. See you next time.